built our church? Who will build our future? Other members of the Board of Stewardship have been sharing information about our church's current programs. Today, thanks to church historian Albert Weller and other sources, we'll be looking through the telescope of our history and our future. Things we can learn from, things that inspire us as we strive to fulfill our missions: worship, growth, service, and fellowship. You probably know that the Congregational Church descended from the early English Puritans, settlers seeking religious freedom in the New World, crossing the Atlantic Ocean on the Mayflower to found Plymouth Plantation in 1620. But they weren't the first Europeans to build settlements in New England. The Dutch East India Company came to America in the early 1600s looking for a passage to the Indies. In 1610, they commissioned English explorer Henry Hudson, who sailed along upper New York Bay, north of Manhattan Island, and up the river that now bears his name. The Dutch explorers claimed adjoining lands in New York, Canada, south to Virginia, and including the Connecticut shoreline, Hartford, and Albany. You may have also heard of a small island they purchased off the coast of New Jersey. Eventually, a treaty was signed allowing Puritans from Massachusetts Bay Colony at Boston to settle in the Hartford area. As that settlement grew, people from the Farmington area sought more farmland and resources, purchasing the area we know as Waterbury from the local Native Americans. This large area included modern-day Watertown, Middlebury, and Naugatuck. In 1691, the Congregational Church was built on the Waterbury Green, which was a particular problem on Sundays, when everyone was expected to travel to church for worship, a trip of more than 2 hours each way, walking. And until 1736, the lack of a bridge over the Naugatuck River meant a difficult fording. Finally, in 1790, Middlebury was made a separate town, adding pieces of Southbury and Woodbury to its original boundaries, and in 1796, our local church was formed. We grow as disciples of Christ through study and prayer. Sabbath schools were established in the late 1700s in Gloucester, England, by Robert Raikes and others, offering both religious and basic secular education to child laborers who worked during the week. Our church joined the Sabbath school movement in 1801. This became the model for the common school, where every child received a basic education, and for our Sunday school. In 1953, our church's women's evening group planned and launched the cooperative nursery school for 3- and 4-year-olds, now known as the Preschool on the Green. Our Sunday school rooms feature beautiful murals inspired by events and places in the Bible, such as Noah's Ark and the storytelling tent. In fact, that's one of the things that attracted my daughter Lexi and me to this church. These were painted by our artistically talented members. A sure sign of the power of our Christian education programs has been the number of ministers raised up from Middlebury Congregational Church. That is, members of the church who have gone on to become ministers. I've found 13. Some of you may know personally, others you may recognize as well-loved Middlebury families. They include John B. Richardson, Nathaniel S. Richardson, Sylvester Hine, George F. Bronson, Henry A. Russell, Bradford L. Broomfield, Charles M. Purinton, Robert E. Stowe, Rebecca Spencer, Peter Lucky, Elizabeth Polglaze, and Jeffrey B. Lukens. Our first Middlebury-raised minister was the Reverend Dr. Bennett Tyler, educated at Yale College, called as a pastor to South Britain Congregational Church in June 1808, with their congregation growing from 30 to 120 members during his tenure. In 1822, he was selected as the 5th president of Dartmouth College, founded by the Reverend Eleazar Wheelock as an institute to educate Native Americans. Tyler endowed the first scholarship at Dartmouth, intended for the education of pious, indigent young men for the ministry. During Tyler's administration, Dartmouth admitted its first African-American student, Edward Mitchell, in 1824, who graduated and became a Baptist minister. After Tyler returned to pastoral ministry, he was elected as the first president and professor of Christian theology at the new Theological Institute of Connecticut, known today as the Hartford Seminary. Whether performing or listening, music in worship enhances our spirituality. Even in the early days, music was an important part of worship, with choirs of 50 or 60 members guided by the choir master's tuning fork, and occasionally accompanied by a violin, a bass viol, or a flute. In 1855, the church purchased a melodeon. In fact, I was just looking at it this morning. It's in the back of the church, for the Sabbath school, and a reed organ for the church. In 1908, the church purchased its first pipe organ, with funds raised in honor of Pastor Leverett Griggs in recognition of his love of music. After fire destroyed the church in 1935, a Hammond electric organ was substituted. In the 1950s and 60s, under the combined leadership of Jesse Davis, Minister of Music, and Norman Hovey as organist, our active choirs grew to 5, with a corresponding increase in attendance. In 1961, a rebuilt pipe organ was installed. Our current organ is a Holtkamp, designed and built for our church. We've always supported the needs of our neighbors, near and far. The Gentlemen's Foreign Missionary Association was formed at our church in 1828. Then the Benevolent Association of Middlebury was organized by the women of the church. The two groups merged in 1831 and raised $67.57. That's over $2,000 in today's money. During the Civil War, church members made clothing, bandages, and bedding for the soldiers. In the First World War, they sewed for the Red Cross and purchased Liberty bonds. During World War II, the Reverend William H. McCants took a leave of absence and joined the U.S. Army to serve as a chaplain. He returned as a captain after serving in the Pacific Theater and in Army camps in Europe and the United States. After the flood of 1955, our members cleaned up debris in factories and churches. Youth members helped with children evacuated to the Westover School. We collected funds to help flood-damaged churches. We collected clothing, bedding, towels, soap for families in Waterbury and Naugatuck. In 1970, Reverend Lucky noted that more than 50% of our operating budget went into mission work. Our fellowship events keep us connected with each other. Our classic Strawberry Festival debuted in 1954 and has been a favorite of our members and friends from surrounding towns. In the 1950s, the Mr. and Mrs. Club combined comic operettas with fundraising, performing 11 Broadway musicals on the Memorial School stage for hundreds of ticket holders. Recently, our acting troupe has incorporated dinner theater in its comic repertoire. There's much more history and the people who are making it, but time constraints dictate that it must be considered on another occasion. This is a church that is active, mission-driven, that I want to be a part of, and I think you do too. You've heard about the faith community that built our church. I invite you to help build our future. Thank you.